Hello, Curly Solelli here. In this video, we're going to take a look at file access. Very useful in any programming language. PowerShell would be no exception. So we'll take a look at saving data to a CSV file, saving data to a plain old text file. We'll look at reading data in from a CSV file and reading data from a text file. And we'll look at ways to use that data, manipulate that data, change that data, throw it in repetition structures and loops. We'll look at how we could create a very simple database and save records from that database and then load records from that database. So again, something that we can add into our scripting repertoire, into our palette of colors that we paint with, that can make our scripts more useful, more powerful, more versatile. In this video, we're going to take a look at file access. And PowerShell offers us a lot of options when it comes to file access. There are a lot of functions and methods and objects that we can use to write data to a plain text file and read it back from a plain text file as ASCII text, to write data to a CSV file or a binary file and read it back. Lots of different objects and methods available, and that's a very useful capability no matter what you're doing with your scripts. If you're just simply writing data or information to a log file as plain ASCII text, or if you are saving information in binary format from a commandlet, piping it from one commandlet into a CSV file or something, for example, or creating a report from data in Active Directory or Exchange Online or SharePoint or Security and Compliance. So no matter what you're doing, file access is a very important, very useful tool to add to your repertoire in PowerShell, to add to your palette of colors that you can paint with. So we're just going to go over several, methods or functions that PowerShell offers us. And the first one I want to take a look at is add content. And with add content, you can write data to a CSV file, okay? And we'll take a look at the way that it works. So I'm going to grab this block of code here, and we'll throw it over here. Okay, so we have a variable data file, and it holds the path. Okay, in this case, it's at the root drive and a subdirectory called data, and the file name itself, MLP main characters 1 strings.csv. Okay, and that's the absolute file path here. All right, so if I were pathing it, and in later examples, there's also a method that we can call to get the location where a script is being run from, so you could automatically save data to a log file in the same directory as where the script was being run from, or read from a config file. So in this example, we're using an absolute path, but there are also ways to do a relative path, and I will go over that in probably the next video. Okay, so we'll get to that. But for now, an absolute path, and in this case, we have an array with 6 strings, just the names of MLP main characters. Here is the method, right? The function that we want to call add-content. And we have 2 arguments here. So we're passing in, 2 arguments, these parameters, the path, in this case, data file. And if I wanted to, I could put this whole string literal here instead of data file, but this is the way, when I do file access, I like to set things up in a variable, and that way if I want to change what I name the file, or if I want to change where I save the file, then I only have to change it once up here. As far as the value assigned to the variable, I don't have to worry about changing it throughout my code. And I didn't do it in this example because I'm trying to keep it simple to start out with, but usually what I do is I break it into 2 separate strings and I concatenate them together. And I'll have one string be the, I'll call it like data directory or data dir or something. And that'll be the directory where I'm saving a log file or a config file, writing to it. And then I'll have another variable that is the actual file name. And then I just, link them together with the overloaded addition operator, just concatenate them. But that also makes it, just doing that, breaking it up into multiple variables, just makes it easier to modify your code, to change the file name, change the directory, whatever you might want to do. That's up to you, right? Your style, your preferences will obviously be totally different than mine. And that's not right or wrong. That's just you, you know what I'm saying? I'll do me and you do you. Isn't that what they say? That's what the song says anyway. That Haley song, or why don't you be you or I'll be me? How does it go? Anyway. Okay, so back on task here, back on target. Add content. I want to pass on the path of the directory and the file name, and then this value argument, right? This parameter for value, that's the field that I want to write. So then think of it as the column name. When add content creates the CSV file and it puts all this data, it's going to put all this data in a single column. This would be the field name, okay? Or the column name. And that's what these are, right? These are MLP characters, the 6 main characters from MLP Friendship is Magic. So we'll put them under a column, and the value of that column, it will be name, okay? So are you with me so far? Okay, we're just going to display something on the console, number of ponies to write the file. Remember the count method from our video on arrays? That just returns the number of elements in the array. So 6. Here's a basic for loop. Remember, for loops are, for loops go with arrays like peanut butter goes with jelly, okay? They go together, and using them together, you can do a lot with just a little bit of code. So x starts out as 0 in the initialization portion. This is our test condition. So while x is less than the number of elements in our array, which is 6, but remember, it's off by 1, so there are 6 elements, but they'll be indexed. The subscript value, that is, will be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we're going to postfix increment to advance x through each iteration or repetition of our for loop. When we do that, at the console, we're going to give a little bit of feedback and display which pony we're writing. We're going to add 1 to make it more friendly for the human, right, for our end user. But remember, the index subscript value always starts at 0. That's my phone. And finally, we're going to call add content, path, data file, and we're going to write that pony, okay? All right? And here, when we run this, okay, well, in this example, I actually wrote the field name. But here I'm writing the ponies beneath it. Okay? Does that make sense so far? All right, so let's run this. And I think when we see the file, a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? So let's see what this code does. We'll run it. Here's our feedback on the console. And if I open our directory, here's the CSV file that our code created. Okay? And if we open the CSV file, okay, let me shrink this down here, and we'll open up the columns here. So you can see when it creates the file, this line here, this line of code, add content, and then with the value name, that's what actually created the column name. That just wrote, the string value name to the very first column, in the first row of our first column. But here I wrote the string value of our array 1 element at a time. As we go through the loop, I'm just writing, and notice it's appending. So it's not erasing or replacing the previous values. It's appending. It's adding to those values 1 line at a time, slowly, and it's going all the way through that CSV and writing every single string in our array. Does that make sense? Okay. So, example 1 with add content. And I'm going to just get rid of this file. We don't need it. All right. let's look at another example. And this time, that was a one-dimensional array. Let's throw this over here. This time, we're going to have in this case, a multi-dimensional array. Okay? So in our multi-dimensional array, our path is still the same, although our file name is different, right? Our file name will be M1P main characters to 2D array.csv. Okay, so we have, in this case, rows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows. And in these rows, what do we have? 3 columns. You see that? So the name Twilight Sparkle, her ability, and the strength of her magic strength, okay? So same thing, we're going to count the number of elements in the array, and that's just synonymous with rows in a 2-dimensional array. So there are 6 rows, there are 6 elements, but each of those elements is itself an array with 3 more elements, which are the 3 columns, if that makes sense. So to write this to a file, we're going to call the method addContent. We're going to pass in the path parameter. So as an argument, data file goes in. Okay. And then the value, well, we're just setting up the names of our columns on this first write process. Okay. So we're going to set up the first column will be pony name, the second column ability, and the third column will be magic strength. Okay. Here's our for loop again. Basic for loop. Same thing, initialize x to be 0 while x is less than pony's count. Well, there's 6 elements, right? There's 6 rows, 3 columns. And then we're just going to display at the console the particular row, the element that we are writing. And when we do that, we're going to call the addContent method again. Again, we have to give it the path to the data file. But this time the value is going to be what's stored in our array. Okay? And so these are 3 separate strings. And these are 3 separate column names. So the file that we produce when we run this code, it should have at the very tippy top, pony name, ability, and magic strength as the names of columns 0, 1, and 2. And then beneath those names, we will write all of this data from our 2D array. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's clear the console. And we're going to run this. Okay, so notice the output here for write host. Writing pony 1, Twilight Sparkle, Alicorn Magic, 9000. Writing pony 2, Fluttershy, Animal Friendship, 4500. Writing pony 3, Rainbow Dash, Sonic Rainboom, 6500. Writing pony 4, Rarity, Unicorn Magic, 3000. Writing pony 5, Applejack, Cowgirl Skills, 1500. Writing pony 6, Pinkie Pie, Party Tricks, 1500. Okay, so if we take a look at the file, we'll open our file here in Excel. And look, boom. And actually, let's just do all of these. We'll expand all of these out. All right, so look, in our first call to add content, we wrote pony name, ability, and magic strength, right? Pony name, ability, magic strength. Pony name, ability, magic strength at the top of the column. And then in our next call to the function add content, we wrote the array elements, and this was inside of a for loop. So it just iterated. And that repetition structure, one by one, we went down our rows. We wrote boom, Twilight Sparkle. We wrote boom, Fluttershy. We wrote boom, Rainbow Dash, all the way down to the bottom. And you can see our values. All of those values have been written to the CSV. So you could take icon, you could do a lot with it. You can pipe it and combine it with other commandlets and things and use it to write to a file and format things and generate reports and things. Very useful tool. So let's get rid of that file. We don't need that anymore. And let's move on to the next example. Okay, now this is a method or a way to write to a file, but it's using a different function called Export-CSV, okay? And Export-CSV gives us additional features and arguments and parameters and you know, as part of the method. But we're going to look at one method of writing objects to a file using Export-CSV. And in this case, I'm going to have two data files, and we're going to look at two methods of writing data to a file using Export-CSV. So one of the things that I can do, we've been talking about two-dimensional arrays. We were talking about even creating arrays of objects and 2 or 3 dimensional arrays of objects. One of the things I can do is I can use what's called a pscustomobject. And that's basically an array of a custom object. It's almost like writing a class on the fly. And I can create that inside of another array as arguments to an array. And so in this example, I've taken the 6 MLP main characters, and they have those same data members, right? Those same attributes. In other words, a pony name, an ability, and a magic strength. And they all have the same, okay? They all have the same field names here, and these must match. If I use this technique, if I use this method, then my objects need to conform, okay? They need to all conform to a certain structure. So I wouldn't want to have, a pony with no name and only 2 attributes. Or I wouldn't want to have another pony with 8 attributes. You know what I'm saying? They all have to match in terms of their structure. The value stored can be different, okay? So the values can all be different, but the variable names inside my pscustomobject, these all have to match. So every single pscustomobject, if I'm going to use this technique, this method, needs to be the same. Needs to be, a clone or a duplicate in terms of its structure. Okay? So anyway, using pscustomobject, basically this is an array inside of an array of a class of object. We're instantiating, creating a class of object. And the next video, probably, hopefully, that we do will be on classes and inheritance hierarchies and polymorphism. And in that video, hopefully it will demystify classes. If you still have questions about classes or, like what the heck, what's the point of a class? Hopefully we'll answer that question. So anyway, all this, right, goes inside of the open and closing parentheses of our array ponies. Ponies is our array. We're going to count the number of elements in ponies, which is what? It's just our rows, right? These objects here are created with pscustomobject, so it would be 6. And when we do that, we're going to do 2 different things here. All right, so the first example, I'm going to take my entire array of ponies, and with Export-CSV, you use the pipe symbol, okay? So remember back to it wasn't that way with add content. This is just calling a function. It's a method. But the way that Export-CSV works, it is made to be used with the pipe symbol. So what you want to export, what you want to write to that comma separated values file, you would put to the left of the pipe symbol, and then you would pipe it into Export-CSV. Export-CSV itself takes a few arguments. In this case, we need to tell it where to write to. So data file 1, this directory and this file name is where it's going to write to. Okay. Append. Add that because if I didn't, it would overwrite. It would erase whatever was there, destroy that file and overwrite it, and we would lose the data. Sometimes that's what you want. Sometimes you want to recreate the file and start from scratch. A lot of times that's not what you want. So be careful to always use append when you're saving data to a file and you want to simply add on to that data or accumulate data in a file. You don't want to erase it or replace it. Log files typically do that, right? You would always want to append. You don't want to erase what was previously stored in the log file. You just want to append new events, error information, things like that to the end of the previous log file and save all that data. So append is a very useful option. It's a very useful parameter to pass in with Export-CSV. And then NoTypeInformation is also useful. Otherwise, it will display a lot of data type information in the very first row, which most of the time you don't need in a CSV export. So if you add NoTypeInformation, it'll get rid of that. And just you'll have a nice clean CSV file with with only the field names, the column names, and the data in the columns. Okay. So just to show you that we can write an entire array at one time. Because remember what we said in the video on arrays? The name of an array is like a pointer to the entire array itself. Granted, an array is a box of boxes, or like a pillbox with compartments. So an array is just a collection of objects. But if you reference the array name by itself, you're referencing all those objects at one time. So see how powerful that is? If I wanted, I could take an entire array and I could write it to a file just by using the array's name, its external name, and piping it to Export-CSV. Boom. So we're going to do that, and we're going to look at the file, and we're going to see what that looks like. See if we can do that. Then in the next example, I'm going to do it. This is the normal way we would do it, right? We would create a for loop, and in that for loop, in this case, x starts out at 0. Well, it's less than ponies count the number of rows, postfix increment x. We're going to display this in the console, and then, okay, so one element, right, one pscustomobject at a time, we're going to pipe it to Export-CSV to data file 2 this time, which has a different name. We're going to use append and NoTypeInformation as well, okay? All right, so if we run this code, let's clear the console here. I'm going to go ahead and run it. Let me drag this out a little bit. Tell you what, I'll clear that again. I'll clear that again. I mean, it's perfectly fine, but I want you guys to actually see the output formatted. All right. Okay, so now let's run this code. Okay, so now the output is all formatted. All right, so this is the code in our for loop, right? Right host. So it's just showing us what it's writing to the file, but let's go see what happened. The first file, all at once, that's where we just used the name of the array, okay, right? So let's check all at once and see if it did what we want, okay? And look, in this case, it did what we want, right? Even though all we used was the array. I'm trying to make all these columns expand at once here. There we go. All right. So even though all we did was pass in the array name, ponies, so here it was ponies, and then pipe Export-CSV. That's okay, because using the array name references the entire array. And here's our field names: pony name, ability, magic, strength. Well, where do they come from? Here, here, and here. So that's why I said if you use this technique, to write to a CSV file this way using a pscustomobject, the structure has to be identical. I couldn't have a different attribute here. It would create an error. It wouldn't be able to format the column names. These all have to be the same throughout each pscustomobject. Why? Because think about what we're doing. We're creating columns, and the column name has to be the same all the way down. Does that make sense? So that's this line of code here, what we were doing, and using an array of pscustomobjects. Okay? We'll close that, and we don't need that. We won't need to save it. All right, so the next file, one at a time. Now, this CSV was created. expand these columns as well. This CSV was created down here in this for loop, okay? And this is where we actually displayed this information here at the console. We went through our array, and each element is itself an array of 3, right? So there are 6 outer elements, and each one of those has 3 inner elements, so rows and columns. And this is where we actually wrote to our file, okay? Pony's Export-CSV data file 2. And notice it produces the same results, okay? Sometimes you'd want to do it this way because you might want control over certain elements or whether or not you write certain elements. Other times, if you just want a quick and dirty way to write an entire array to a file, you can do it like this. And that can be like kind of a quick and easy way to write a large collection of objects to a file. Okay. Oh, let me close Excel here. It's not gonna let me. All right, I can get rid of that file. Okay. So let's take a look at another example, okay? And let me grab this code here. Right here. This will be our next example. Okay, so if you take a look at this code here, okay? This is another way of using Export-CSV and writing a class of object to a file, okay? So this is our data file. And what we have here is an array. This is a dynamic, empty array. I haven't created or added anything to it yet. But we're going to use that technique we saw in the previous example. We're going to write an array of objects into a file, into a CSV file. How do we do that? This time, we're going to use the new object method, and we're going to create a PS object. We'll call it pony1. And then when I do that, I would use the pipe symbol, and I'm going to use this member method, add member, member type, note property. This would be the field name, so name, ability, magic strength. That all goes after the attribute name, okay? And then value is what that's the value that I want to store in this column here, all right, in this attribute. So for name, the value would be Twilight Sparkle. For ability, Alicorn Magic. For magic strength, 9,000. Again, all of these have to match identically in structure. I could not have a pony that had 3 extra attributes, okay? They all have to have exactly 3 attributes. Nor could I have a pony that had an attribute named supercalifragilistic instead of magic strength, okay? In order for it to be compatible, for it to be written into columns under the same name, you know, and to preserve the relationship of values and the data, all of my ponies have to be the same. All of my structures have to be the same. So they would each have to have a name, an ability, and a magic strength. I could add more. My ponies could have 100 different attributes. But if I wrote the first pony that way, I'd have to write the other 5 that way as well. They would all have to have 100 attributes. They may only have 1 attribute. That's fine. But if I do that with pony 1, I also have to do it with ponies 2 through 6. Okay? Does that make sense? So these must match. The values can be different, but the names, the name attribute, right? The column names, the attributes themselves must match. Okay, so the way this works, right? I create the object, pony, whatever I want to call it. And then once I've instantiated and built the object using new object, I'm going to add the members in. And when I'm done, I'm going to use the overloaded addition assignment operator, and I'm just going to add it to my array. Remember I have this array ponies, it's an empty array. I'm just going to add it into the array. And so I do that all the way down, right? my values are different, but everything else is the same. Okay? So for Pony 2, Fluttershy, Pony 3, Rainbow Dash, Pony 4, Rarity, Pony 5, Applejack, Pony 6, Pinkie Pie. I've done that and I've populated this array, and when I get done, now this array holds 6 pony objects. And if I call the count method, it'll tell me I have 6 objects, right? So we have a for loop, and in our basic for loop, we're just going to iterate through the number of elements in ponies, which, remember, that's 6. We're going to display a pony at the console, okay? And then I'm going to take the actual index subscript value, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all 6. I'm going to pipe it to Export-CSV, data file, append, and NoTypeInformation, okay? So if we run that, let's see what that looks like. I'm going to drag this over here, and we'll run it, okay? So, see what that's done? And in this case, I was just displaying the pony's name. Now let's open the file. Here's our CSV file. And there's our field names, okay? All right, so that's just another way of scanning that cat. It's just another way of doing that. It's a matter of preference, or I guess a matter of style, or whatever you want to say, but essentially doing the same thing, okay? But a different way of using a PS object. In this case, the new object method. By the way, if I don't do this, I guess they say a picture's worth 1,000 words. Let me take out the NoTypeInformation argument. And if I run this now, watch what happens when it creates the file. And, oh, actually, let me delete that first. Okay, here we go. Now, let me run that. I didn't want to append that. All right, so now look at the very first, so in this case, it's a PS custom object, and it's adding the data type information. You see what I'm saying? So most of the time, you don't want that in your CSV files. You end up having to manually delete it anyway. All right, so in a situation like that, there's an argument for that. Okay, so if I add that back, NoTypeInformation, and now when I run it and it creates the file, see, so it doesn't have the data type information. Most of the time, we don't really need that. And that's just, so I generally, when I'm writing the CSVs, I generally do use this option. And to illustrate append, okay, so this time I've created a file, right? Take a look at the values. Okay. So we're going to run it again. And going to run this again. And we append it. Remember we have that append option? Now look. So it did not erase, or replace the original, the old data. It just appended the new data at the end of it. So a lot of times that's what you want, but for those situations where you don't want to append, where you want to simply recreate the file, just leave off the append argument. And all right. And now all I have is Pinkie Pie. And why? Well, because every single time I iterate through this loop, if I don't use the append argument, I'm replacing the last pony. I'm overwriting her. I'm erasing her. I'm destroying her and replacing her with the new pony. So the last pony was Pinkie Pie. So without the append method, that's all I've got, right? I just have one pony. on the other hand, if I do append, all right, so if I do have the append argument and I run it, okay, and then it just adds that data in. So now we have two Pinkie Pies. And this is the original one that was written, and then all this data was appended onto the end of it. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. I think that's pretty straightforward. Okay. And let's take a look at the next example. Okay? And we're going to be using Export-CSV here as well. And our data file is going to be Jedis and Sith Lords.csv. And we have an array of Jedi abilities: telekinesis, telepathy, clairvoyance, clairaudience, premonitions, regeneration, healing, animal friendship, mind trick, spirit talking, spirit walking. I just made that. Who knows if that's a Jedi ability? Who knows? They could probably do all kinds of things we don't even know about, right? I mean, they're Jedis. They're awesome. And Sith Lord abilities: telekinesis, telepathy, clairvoyance, clairaudience, premonitions. Probably a lot of the same things Jedis can do, but they also have that lightning thing, right? The force lightning thing. And it looks like they can, in a gross and disgusting and macabre way, raise apprentices from the dead, or whatever it is that the evil emperor did for Anakin to kind of bring him back from death, or whatever bit. So we have two different arrays: Jedi abilities and Sith Lord abilities, and they're of different lengths. We're going to call count to get the number of elements, just to show that they are indeed of different sizes, okay? And we're going to create force user 1, okay? And for the name, he's going to be a Jedi. Age 25, force strength 4,500. This is just to show you how would you write multiple attributes into a column. And one way you could do that is if you save them into an array, then you could take a for loop. You could create a for loop and use an accumulator, right? And just use the overloaded addition assignment operator. And you could add, basically you're just going to concatenate into a single string all these elements separated by a comma and a space. So that's all I'm doing here, right? My accumulator, I'm just going to keep adding and going through all these different Jedi abilities until it's all one entire string separated by commas. And then when I do that, then I'm going to write that to the column abilities. All right, so I'm just showing you a way. You might have situations sometimes when you're trying to generate a report from AD. Well, how do I write multiple values into one column? Because by default, you can't do that. You can only write one item, one object into per column, into a column. Well, the way you do that is you put them all into an array, and then once you have them all in an array, you put it in a for loop and you build a string out of that array with a delimiter, separate it with some character. I chose a comma in this example and a space. And then you can simply use add member and write it, all right, to your object. So you write the whole string to your object here, add member, abilities, and then the entire string, okay? And then when you've done that, then you can finally write it to a file. So then after I've done all that and added all that to force user 1, I can export the CSV and write it to a file. Okay, notice I'm doing the same thing with Sith Lord, right? This time I create an object called force user 2 using new object. It's a PS object. Name, age, and force strength same, but this time it's Sith Lord 75 and 9,000 for the values. Do the same thing with the accumulator. I want to write multiple values into one column. I can't do that by default. So the way I can do that is I put them all into an array. I accumulate every element in that array into a single string with a delimiter or a separator, in this case a comma. And then using, I basically add that entire array into the attribute, into that abilities attribute. and then I can write the entire object to a file. Okay, so let's go ahead and copy and paste and run this. And let me make sure I clear it up. Okay, good. So we're going to run this. Okay. So number of Jedi abilities, 11. Number of Sith Lord abilities, 7. Let's see what happened here with our file. Okay. So even though they have different numbers of abilities and different abilities, if let me expand all these columns here. There, okay. All right, so name Jedi, name Sith Lord. These are all the Jedi abilities, and these are all the Sith Lord abilities, okay? Does that make sense? See? So as a technique, that is a method that you can use to write multiple values to a single column, okay? Now we're going to take a look at reading data from a file. So in this example, we're reading data from a CSV, okay? So we need the directory and the file name, MLP main characters 1 strings.csv. And this time we're going to use import-CSV. And I pass in data file, so this is the path, the absolute path to the directory and the file name. And then when I read it, I'm going to store it inside of a variable, in this case called ponies. I have another variable, pony counter. Pony is loaded from file. This lets me know the number of rows, right? The number of objects that I read from the file. And then display entire array elements from row. So using a for each loop, I could use for, I could use while true. In this case, I choose for each. For each pony and ponies, I'm going to postfix increment my pony counter. I'm going to say pony element, pony counter, and then pony. Well, ponies is what I read from the file. That's each row, right? Each pony record. So I'm basically going to display that here inside this for each loop. And then display value of name only from row, right? So this is an entire pony, okay? So that's an entire row. But what if I only wanted to display a certain attribute, like a certain column? Well, this example here, in this for each loop, this is only going to display the pony's name, okay? So if I run this, let me clear the screen here, and let's copy and paste this. Okay, so if I run it, all right, and so you can see, in this case, I'm getting the data stored in the file row by row. Name is Pinkie Pie, Twilight Sparkle. Let's take a look at that file. MLP main characters 1 strings.csv. Okay, so it just has this single attribute name and my pony names. But if I had multiple values, let's say that I also had pony age and other attributes, I can just use the dot operator. And with that dot, I can reference the column name. Okay? Let's take a look at another example, okay? And here, we'll throw this over here. And this is a shorthand method of reading from a CSV. In this case, using the dollar symbol and the underscore and dot. So I'm going to read all the MLP main characters. And I'm going to import CSV data file. And then for each, I'm just going to write. And this is the field name. And this $_dot, that just represents each pony, each record, right? Each row that was saved to the CSV file. So look at this, only 2 lines of code. And in 2 lines of code, I can essentially do the same thing, right? Name, and this is all 6 ponies. So that's kind of pretty powerful, right? And that's kind of a nice shorthand method. This, remember, this is just a symbol. It means, you know, whatever the current object is, that pony, that row, that record that you read from the CSV file. Let's take a look at another example. And I'm going to throw this over here and test, okay? So in this case, we have a data file, and we're going to import CSV from the data file and store it, assign it to ponies. We're going to show how many objects we read from the file, and we're going to display the entire object in the element row. So if I want to do that, I can go through, and this will display all the columns, right? The entire column data. But now in this example, this second for loop down here, I'm going to display individual columns: name, ability, magic, strength. Okay? So to see how that would look, if I were to run it, clear, I'll hit F5. Okay? So notice here, at this subscript value, I'm reading an entire pony all at once, all 3 columns that are part of that pony. But here, I'm reading individual attributes, individual columns of that pony. So the entire pony at once, you see over here in this example, and 1 pony at a time, and each attribute of that pony at a time, 1 at a time, in the second example. All right, so second for loop, first for loop. Is that fairly straightforward? Yeah. Are you beginning to see some of the possibilities? And how somehow I closed PowerShell. Lovely. It's getting way too late. It's almost 4 in the morning and I'm making PowerShell videos. Why am I doing this? I don't know. Oh my. Let's see. All right. Get rid of that. Next example, let's see. Did that. All right, here's our next example, okay? Now, those were all examples of reading from a CSV file and writing to a CSV file. Now we're gonna look at writing plain text, okay? So to do that, we're gonna use a function called outFile, a method outFile. And I have some code here. And all right, so the name of my log file is galactica-log1.txt, and it's just going to be Galactica actual to Pegasus, verify colonial authentication codes, spin up FTL drives, and prepare to jump. A Cylon-based star has been detected just outside our defense perimeter. Okay, so this is the message I want to save to my log file. Here's the location of my log file in the data directory. Okay. Write host, I'm just going to display this to the console and then write the message to the file. Well, just like I would with export-CSV, I use the pipe symbol. So I take my string and I pipe it out to outFile and then log file. And by the way, remember that this was the escape sequence for adding a line at the console with ReadLine? Well, I need to do that with R as well if I'm going to write to a text file. So it's the combination of R and N, okay? You know, in that last little character beneath the tilde in the top left corner of your keyboard, you have to do it with R and N, and that actually adds a carriage return and line feed to a text file. If I just did this, it wouldn't actually add, I mean, that would add a line to the console, but it would not add a line to the text file. So be aware of that when you're writing to a plain text file. But we're using outFile, And so if we run this, let's see what happens. Okay, so it displays the message, and then if we go find the file, let's see if there's a Galactica log1 text. Okay, and here's our Galactica log1 text. And there's the message that was written to our file. Okay. All right. And let's move on to the next example. Okay. Now that was using out file. This next example we're going to look at is using set content to write plain text to a file. So remember, there's a get content and there's a set content. Okay. So in this example, data iRobot behavior directives _1, if you ever read that Isaac Asimov book or saw the movie, and the message 3 laws safe prime directives. Robot may not by action harm a human. Robot may not by omission of action harm a human. Robot must protect itself if it does not conflict with the first 2 laws. We're going to display it to the console in the same way with file. We're going to use the pipe symbol. We're going to take that string and pipe it to set-content and then our log file, right? So if we run this, here's the value of the string, the message, and let's go check our log file. iRobot prime directives. And there's our log file, see? Okay. And also notice we were adding, in this case, that double sort of escape sequence. So it's not just enough, we have to add a carriage return and a line feed to add a line to a text file. So just kind of bear that in mind. So that's set content. And we looked at out file, different methods. Now we're going to look at reading text from a file, right? So the file that we created, if we wanted to read from it, we could call get content. So I have a log file. Here it is. It's got data written to it already. I call get content on log file and I assign that to my string. And then I'm just going to display my string at the console. And there it is, right? Matter of fact, let me run that again. I'll read it again there. Galactica actual to Pegasus, verify cloning authentication codes, spin up FTL drives, and prepare to jump. A silent base star has been detected just outside our defense perimeter. Oh no. So just another example there. But in this case, I'm reading the data back from the file that I wrote to the file. Okay. And let's look at read from text file. And this time we're going to use a StreamReader. Okay, so using a StreamReader. Here is our log file again, Galactica log1.txt. And what I'm going to do, I'm using a StreamReader. And to do that, I have to, this is just a variable name, but I have to instantiate or build an object. So I use the new object method and I call from system IOStreamReader and I pass in log file. That's an argument, right? So it goes out as a parameter. This is the file I want to read from. I set my line number to be 0, reading 1 line at a time. And now what I'm going to do, current line is equal to StreamReader, in this case, the ReadLine method will read 1 line of text. So this is going to loop until, as long as it's not equal to null, as long as we don't have an empty line. But as soon as we hit an empty line and there's nothing there, then, we're going to break out of our while true loop. That means we're done, right? We're done with it. So as long as there's still text there, we'll keep reading line by line, as long as it's not equal to null. But once this is no longer true and it becomes false, once I do hit an empty line, a null line, we'll fall out of the loop and we'll stop reading, because we don't want to keep reading if there's nothing else there, right? Of course not. All right, so we're going to increment the line number, and we're just going to show line number in the current line. And then at the very end, we call the dispose method when we're done with our StreamReader, because that just cleans up the memory. The way we can salvage the resources in the memory that it was using, we don't need it anymore. So to read from that text file one line at a time, sometimes that's what you want to do. There, see? So I could use this technique with a StreamReader if I wanted to format the text I read into a certain format, you know, or margins or something like that. Notice how I can control that now. Okay, and notice we hit that null line here, right? Line 6. It's no longer equal to, it's no longer not equal to null. Double negative there, but it's null, nothing there. So then it finally falls out of the while true loop and calls dispose and cleans up and gets rid of our StreamReader object. Okay, so let's take a look at another method. And this is also a StreamReader object, okay? And in this StreamReader object, in this case, we have a file, we have a StreamReader again, we pass in log file. And in this example, we're looking for a specific line, okay? So we're looking for a specific line of text. I want to find line 3. That's my target line. So what do? I have the same while true loop. I'm going to loop through every single line of that text from that text file, line by line, until it's no longer not equal to null, right? Double negative, but in other words, until I hit an empty line, a null line. Then I know I'm at the end of the file. I'm going to increment line number, and if line number is equal to, the target line, what's the target line? 3. Do what? I'm going to write that line to the console. Okay, same thing, dispose, cleanup. So if I run this text, so line 3, spin up FTL drives and prepare to jump. Well, is that line 3? 1, 2, 3. That's line 3 in our text file, see? So this is just an example of how you could target and read a specific line of text from the file if that's what you wanted to do.